Hello everyone, Bag here. Well everyone, we had a good run with the 3.5 units, having actual emotes while I covered them, but now we are back to the janky PNG era. Evernight is coming in the first half of 3.6, so if you want to know how to build a team around her, then this video is for you. I'm not going to go into the ultra specifics of her kit, and instead I'll just start off by mentioning everything relevant for this video. Evernight is an HP scaling Ice Remembrance unit with a member sprite named Evie, who gets summoned at the start of combat and with her skill and ultimate. Evie's whole gimmick is that it gets action advanced and explodes in an AoE hit the moment Evernight gets 16 of a unique resource, named Memoria. With this explosion getting stronger, the more Memoria Evie consumes when exploding. Evernight gains Memoria via herself or any member sprite including Evie acting, her and Evie losing HP, when using her skill, and when Evie uses its normal single target attack that it does on its non-explodey turn. Her 240 cost ultimate is an AoE hit from Evie that puts Evernight into an enhanced state, giving constant debuffs to the enemy and buffs to herself and Evie. Her skill also gets enhanced, causing it to gain an additional 12 Memoria. This enhanced state lasts until Evie explodes twice, and while it's active, Evernight gains enough Memoria when skilling for Evie to instantly explode when it's summoned. Also, Evernight gets energy whenever her or any member sprite act, and she also gets a 1-turn speed boost after Evie's explosion that also scales on consumed Memoria. To be a bit on the nose with teeing up future synergies, it's worth noting that Evie consumes all of its HP when it explodes. Evernight and Evie consume their own HP with every action, on top of Evernight also draining her HP with her skill, and yes, otherwise the skill is just to summon Evie and gain some buffs, while not actually doing any damage, and speaking of which, she also provides multiple buffs to ally member sprites, with one of these buffs depending on how many Remembrance characters are on the team. So they've laid it on pretty thick with who works and doesn't work with her, which should make this tier list relatively straightforward. Ooh, what's that? An HP scaler with a non-damaging skill? That sounds like a Cerydra to the D tier then. Ooh, sorry, I don't make the rules, just kidding, I do. Haha. Anyways, much like with Inoxa, Evernight is defined by her sub-DPS playstyle to a single carry, with that carry in this case being, of course, Castorice. We'll talk about Evernight's solo carry potential as well later, but let's first go into all the ways that she was made for this synergy. A team full of HP scaling Remembrance units benefits both Castorice and Evernight very nicely. More targets for enemies' AoE attacks, and Castorice's AoE HP draining means a good chunk more charge for her dragon, with charge generation being the main linchpin for Castorice's damage per cycle, while Evernight then also has a direct buff that incentivizes these exact teams. Even though it says Evernight gains 2 Memoria whenever her or Evie lose HP, if they both lose HP in the same action, Evernight gets 4. So AoE HP drains from the likes of Castorice are, again, the name of the game with her. Evie has 50% of Evernight's HP, and it drains all of that HP every time it explodes. Castorice only has a limit on charge gained per action with healing, not with HP being lost. So this amount of HP drain ends up being a sizable amount of charge. Granted, before she got nerfed, she used to give about 28% charge before that got cut down to about 14%, but even then 14% every time Evie explodes is still very notable. They also consume 5% of their current HP with each of their actions. So for Evernight, 5% of her HP is around a 10th of an Evie explosion, while Evie is about half of that. So 1-ish% charge per action isn't that impactful, but it can help a good amount with Ika's healing, as we'll touch on later. Her raw damage buffs, compared to who she is replacing, are honestly not that much to write home about, but it's that comparatively faster charging that lets her hold her ground here. There is also the weird way that she works with Castorice, where you would want to make use of the dragon's res pen field to boost Evie's explosion damage, but doing so would mean that you aren't building charge for Castorice, since, well, the dragon has to be alive. You usually want to ult as soon as possible with Castorice as well, which can make it a bit awkward to fit her damage windows within Evernight's enhanced state for that juicy 30% vulnerability debuff. An important thing to note is that when Evernight gets 16 Memoria, the action advance that Evie gets for it to then explode with is a one-time thing, unlike something like Mem's action advance that constantly gets refreshed with every action after RMC reaches 100% charge. So if you push Castorice's dragon ahead of it, or use other ults like a Hyacine ult or a Mem action advance to RMC ult, then all of those moves will be able to benefit from Evie being on the field before it explodes. That is also something to keep in mind. You kinda have to play around the fact that Evie a lot of the time won't have that much field time, and while it's not alive, you won't get the advantage with the extra charge that having an extra HP bar on the team brings for the likes of Hyacine and Castorice. You are already held back with spamming Evie's explosions through Evie only being summonable back with Evernight's skill and ultimate, so stalling Evie's explosion through shoving everyone ahead of it makes sense. As beyond the aforementioned keeping Evie alive benefits for Castorice charging, Evie's explosion damage and Evernight's speed buff after said explosion scale with consumed Memoria. So beyond just more Evie damage, stalling Evie's explosion means faster Evernight turns, which means faster Evie respawning, which means more explosions. That's the basic game plan that she wants to fulfill here, with with the main bottleneck being her team needing to do a lot of the heavy lifting with Memoria generation. Keeping Evie alive is a lot easier outside of Evernight's enhanced state, since it won't explode right away after being spawned, but at that point you don't get the 20% vulnerability from the enhanced state, which is a lot of the reason to even field her in the first place. I also should mention here that Evernight's sub-DPS potential is really not too ultra amazing here. Again, in the same vein as Anoxa in the harder teams, Evernight's personal damage isn't really the main selling point here. It's the buffing and unique utility instead, although obviously Evernight does have much higher damage than the likes of RMC, who she is potentially replacing. Evernight also doesn't straight up lose damage in these teams, like Anoxa does, and I do think she is squarely better here than as a main DPS, unlike him, but it is important to keep your expectations in check. Her damage is an important part of her utility, and if other units can buff it, then that is important to consider as well. But the focus here is Castorice, and in the role of supporting her and the team's overall member sprite damage, Evernight does a great job. That competition with who she is replacing that I mentioned earlier is the real thing holding Evernight back here, as she is likely to be replacing a unit who already does their job really well. This is sort of like Hyacine replacing Gallagher, where Evernight is for sure a best-in-slot option for Castorice teams, but is she absolutely 100% needed? Not really, in my opinion, only because Castorice already works so great without her. Still, if you want to increase Castorice's prevalence in the meta going forward for your account, then she can be a pretty good pick. Again, while her upgrade as a replacement isn't nearly as impactful as Hyacine replacing Gallagher, she is still a good upgrade in her own right. Like, to put it this way, Castorice's premium team with Evernight is basically the strongest team in the game right now. But does that fact mean that Castorice needs Evernight? No, but she's there if you want to unlock the higher ceiling. And on top of that, there is a lot of merit in replacing RMC, especially with the Trailblazer getting new paths coming eventually in 4.x. A theme you'll see today, also, is that Evernight is pretty expensive to make work. What that means with Castorice is that Lycone options are a bit of a problem. Evernight's personal damage does matter, and unlike other teammates, she really doesn't have good cheap Lycone alternatives to fall back on. Her signature provides an additional 20 Death Shred to ally member sprites, on top of getting higher HP for Castorice to drain from and Evie to explode from. Her signature is a way to separate her from her contentious competition, but getting E0 S1 of a character just for that is pretty dicey cost-wise. Still, it's good by its own merits, on top of the Remembrance path in general being rather starred for options outside of its supports, so you could take that as her being notably strong with it, or notably lacking without it. Anyways, Castorice does deserve to be in the S tier, obviously, as she is the unit Evernight was designed for. And we can keep talking about Castorice as we move on, as there are other pieces to this puzzle to examine. A plug here to subscribe. A full-on guide for Evernight should be out this week, along with Donghung PT coverage shortly after that, so stick around if you'd like to see that. Alright, back to the vid. Hyacine is a relatively interesting unit here. At base, she provides 3 important utilities that no other sustain can bring to Evernight. She is a Remembrance unit, her member sprite has personal damage that's nice to buff up, and she gives actual tangible offensive utility to Evernight through her team-wide HP buff. All of Evernight and Evie's HP draining gives more triggers to Ika's healing, which not only boosts Ika's damage, since its scaling is based off of its healing, but this then also increases Castorice's charging even further. And also like with Castorice, the more Remembrance teammates, the more HP bars to heal with their AoE heals, which further fuels this game plan. Hyacine's 100% crit rate also ensures that Evernight's buff to member sprite crit damage isn't wasted, especially with how difficult it can be to slot crit damage effectively onto Hyacine builds. Hyacine and RMC are really the only skill point using units in this core to spam their skill. So it is also nice that Evernight doesn't use skill points, and also Evie generates 1 SP every time it explodes. So yeah, as if this team is even close to having SP issues, Evernight makes it a complete doubly non-issue. The most important factor with Hyacine for activating Evernight is just her sheer lack of competition. No other sustain provides even a single morsel of her utility in this core. Unlike Castorice, Evernight does not scale with healing directly, so the likes of Gallagher and Luocha don't do anything for her, and other sustains just don't give her anything that she actually wants. So then I do think I'll actually place Hyacine above Castorice here, as I think she's more essential to making Evernight function at a high level, both as a sub DPS and as a potential main DPS. Let me also then just place every sustain in those lower tiers. Yes, a lot of them can work with Evernight and Castorice just fine, but Hyacine is seriously just that large of an upgrade here. There's also the obvious placement of putting every preservation unit in the D tier, although again her HP draining isn't actually important to her own game plan, so Fushuan's HP boost isn't actually half bad here, but for everyone else, you want her and Evie to lose HP, so shields are actively detrimental here. A lot of you probably let out a deep sigh earlier when I mentioned the importance of team-wide HP drains, though, as, yeah, I don't want to beat around the bush. There. It deserves to be there. Hyacine's Lycone is as important here as it is for someone like Blade. Does it make or break Evernight by itself? No, not at all. But in a Castorice team where everyone's damage matters, 18% vulnerability is a big deal. and that HP drain on every Hyacine action makes her give 5 Memoria instead of the normal 1 from just Ika's action, assuming Evie is alive to be drained from. If Hyacine acts about 4 times per cycle, as in 3 turns and 1 ultimate, that's an extra 16 Memoria from just this light cone, which is an entire Evie explosion worth of Memoria that you'd miss out on at S0. Again, it's not needed, but it is a very large team upgrade for sure. Alright, enough stalling it, let's talk about Castorice's 4th team slot here, which is a bit tricky with this lineup. When incorporating Evernight, the main 2 options for this slot are rather obvious. Tribbie likes both high HP teammates and multiple HP bars for her personal damage, and her team-wide damage amps better serves this team, where again everyone's damage matters. RMC on the other hand is a remembrance unit, which not only fully fulfills Evernight's crit damage buff, but they also give all the other Memosprite associated benefits, with AoE HP drains and AoE attacks having more targets to take HP from, and giving Memoria and energy to Evernight with every mem action, alongside more frequent HP drains through action events in Castorice. And yeah, RMC is pretty important through giving Castorice extra turns for her charge generation, and that true damage is also pretty hard to beat, but only giving this utility to one teammate is just worse than what Tribbie gives, especially if we also, of course, factor in DDD. Both of them deserve to be in this S tier, but overall, Tribbie does perform better generally. Castorice will do more damage by herself with RMC, but the actual team overall will do better with Tribbie. RMC is also able to hold Hyacine's light cone though, so if you have 2 of them, then go for it, I guess. Other 4-slot teammates like Cipher, Ranmei, and Silverwolf can give that strong AoE team buffing in the same vein as Tribbie, but they are of course a slightly worse trade-off in a Castorice team, as you probably know by now. Their baseline utility is good enough to perform very well here, but they, like Tribbie, are behind due to their lack of a Memosprite or HP drain, while also not really having that much of an X factor to really make up for that. Silverwolf is at least notable here for the fact that Evernight and Castorice don't element share, so she can help in a lot of fights that aren't weak to both Ice and Quantum. But since Evernight's personal damage isn't that insane, propping her up with an Ice implant is less important than a genuine synergy that works across the whole team. Jiaoshu is of course behind here, being that ever-dependable slight downgrade, while Pela can also remain slightly competitive, especially with her Ice Res Pen on her E4. There's been some other units that people have asked if she can support for, but other than Castorice, it is a bit questionable. Can Evernight support Aglaea? Well, Garment Maker isn't really doing the majority of Aglaea's damage, so buffing only them is kinda meh. Garment Maker's fast speed does generate decent Memoria and energy for Evernight, but the real problem here is that Evie doesn't really do anything for Aglaea's very demanding energy problems. So without a lot of Eidolons, this isn't much of a functional pairing. Can she support Jingliu? Well, Jingliu's constant team-wide HP drains is certainly something here, but her lack of a Memosprite means that the majority of what Evernight wants, as well as what Evernight gives, is lost here. In a team with these 2, Hyacine and RMC, you could get some value, but I would think most generic second slots would be better here. Really, if you want to make Evernight work outside of Castorice teams, your best bet is to just play her as a hypercarry. And in a hypercarry team, basically none of what I've said previously has changed, as you've probably noticed by now that many of her synergies are rather set in stone, regardless if it's in the context of a sub DPS or as a main DPS. RMC becomes even more prominent in this context. Them and Hyacine are really the only units right now in the game that can help Evernight get to her bare minimum of 3 Remembrance teammates without Castorice. RMC's action advance also lets you put Evernight back in front of Evie after Evie gets action advance to explode, meaning that you can fit in extra ult buffed skills with well-timed mem advances, which is an absolutely huge increase to the amount of expected Memoria that you would generate per ultimate. RMC is also one of the very few supports that can actually support Evie's constantly exploding playstyle, as not only do most supports not even buff Memosprites in the first place, which is bad since Evie is literally actually 100% of Evernight's damage, but it's also bad since Evie explodes and respawns very quickly, meaning given buffs on it get reset very fast. You hear that, Sunday? Yes, Evernight does have a Memosprite with a separate faster speed that therefore could benefit from his action advance, but a lot of the time, Evie is dead when it comes to Evernight's turn, meaning Sunday won't be able to give any of his buffs to Evie when it gets spawned. Castorice and Sunday can work if you forego exploding the dragon until everything lines up, but Evie's forced explosions don't give you that luxury. Evie's speed is also very hard to predict since it's constantly fluctuating depending on the amount of Memoria consumed per Evie explosion. I wouldn't say it's outright impossible to speed tune, but if you couldn't tell, it's a lot more trouble than it's worth. Bronya and Sparkle can't buff Evie at all, and obviously the same goes for the likes of Tingyun. Robin works about as well here as she can in Castorice teams, which is to say that she can work, but please just use her on a different team as she'll probably do much better there. I've seen people ask about Jade, and it is the same buffing problem. Jade doesn't get stacks from Memosprites unless if they specifically have the contract, which is literally impossible to keep up on with Evie given how often it explodes. So even though Jade's HP drain is nice here, carrier, it is still a no-go. The real answer with Evernight as a hypercarry is that she kinda just takes all of Castorice's teammates while generally performing worse than Castorice. I don't want to downplay being marginally worse than Castorice as a bad thing, as in isolation, Evernight is extremely strong, but you basically have to bench your Castorice to make an Evernight hypercarry team work. So assuming you have a Castorice to bench, there's really no reason to not just play Castorice's premium team instead. And well, on that note, that's the list. A very bottom-heavy list, that's for sure, as Evernight is rather limited in who actually works well with her. And unlike a lot of other units, the replacements for those cornerstone teammates don't really hold a candle to who they are replacing. Going to the channel member corner, we have Sheep Paralysis Demon as our next new member. I'm gonna have to zoom out a bit in order to fit everyone, which is a great problem to have. So once again, thank you to all of you for your continued support. With that, I hope you all have a great rest of your day. Bye.